Hi, beautiful mamas from around the world, and welcome back to my Contemplation Station at Mothering in the Dark, where our focus, our intention, and our inspiration is igniting you. I'm so happy to have you back, and I'm very excited to do this contemplation with you. The topic that we're coming into our contemplation today with is stop improving yourself, which I ended off the last episode by saying that this can sound provocative, if not somewhat irresponsible or bad advice. But that's not the way we're going to go today. We're not saying that whatsoever. But before we jump into looking at improvement, the part of the word, or the word that really stuck out for me was self. And so I went on a little mission there, seeing as though igniting you is our inspiration. And so I brought the first card in the runes, which is an ancient cultic divination tool, which is not really much more than profound steps of wisdom in the journey, which is called initiation in the runes language, which we all go through. And I mean, it's from ancient times, so it's not new that we go through cycles of exploration. I suppose a more modern day kind of take on this would be Joseph Campbell's the hero's journey, where you go into the dark night of the soul and you come back. But what I love about like the runes or the concept of initiation is that we do mini initiations and we do longer initiations, and there's kind of a lot of cycles within us and a lot of levels of process and progress going on inside of us, because we are actually wired towards expansion. We're wired towards improvement. So before we jump in with improvement, I think if we spend some time just locating ourselves and locating you, so that you and not what we talk about is really the portal that's all of this beautiful information or banter is received today, because that would be where the true power lies. So let's first locate. I used the word timeline in the last episode, but that might not be something that makes sense to you, or it might conjure up actual linear time for you. So today I'm going to be using the word let's locate ourselves and let's locate our conversation. So when we are contemplating, we are in a thinking space and in a talking space just before we can justify, explain, and defend something. So when we are having a conversation out loud with someone else, what we're doing is we're trying to mutually explain each other, and while, sharing as much information as possible. And so then, yes, we do explain and we do justify and we do defend. However, we are going to locate ourselves in the space just before, which creates a safe container. In therapy, we talk about creating a safe container for a group or for our client, which makes space for deeper feeling and deeper thoughts and deeper experiences. And this is something that we actually do for ourselves, or can do for ourselves, when we allow ourselves to, when we allow our inner narrative to be free of needing to explain, defend, or justify what we're saying. So that an idea can stand as an idea, and it doesn't need to make sense in terms of other ideas until we get to the point where we are grounding it and we are taking action. But the the exploration happens in a much more open space. The reason why I love this card in particular is its position as number one. The self is where the initiation starts, and it's kind of the source of the process of change in us. And not to, I'll use the word that is in the runes, but I don't want the word right to be loaded from like where we'd see it in a dualistic way, as in wrong and right, because that would lose the purpose of, I suppose, the wisdom in what the intention of this message is. And it's that the self is a right relationship or correct relationship. So we could say an imbalance or an open relationship with self. What will flow from there is right relationship with our outside world. So whether it be, what we eat and what we, how we communicate and how we work, or our relationship with each other and our relationship with the world at large and with the bigger picture or higher experience, whichever wording you want to put to the multiple relationships that flow from our relationship with ourselves. So to make it even more aligned with you, give yourself a moment and think, how do I hold self-improvement in myself? Okay? And so we're going to start with perhaps the slowest or lowest, not to be misconstrued as bad or worse. It's just the beginning of the function that improvement can serve. But it's not that we must stop improving ourselves, but it's more to bring awareness to where our mindset is when it comes to improvement. Because in its shadow or in its lowest potential, what improvement does is it says that you're here and where you want to be is here. Or if you get here, then you'll have a deeper sense of satisfaction, purpose, maybe even status, achievement, which is not untrue, all right? But from this perspective, what is being suspended is like the process in between, whether it be a few minutes or whether it be a few years. The idea or the narrative that until I have achieved this improvement in my life, what I am living in is something that is incomplete, not enough, and inadequate. And so I kind of suspend myself, being myself, and with that, noticing a whole lot of stuff that happens in between until I have this experience. And that can make improvements actually lead us down the road rather than up the road. From the perspective of it can very much reinforce a sense of low self-esteem, or especially if this beautiful game plan that you've delineated for yourself, that you don't manage to rise to it or to fulfill it according to the steps that you have laid out or that someone else has laid out for you. So don't get me wrong, because there are times in our life where what we actually need is someone, or what we can actually appreciate is someone saying, hey, I found a shortcut, and if you just do this, this, and this, you can get the same results. Or, sharing organizational tips and stuff like that. That is certainly very helpful improvement. So we're not saying don't take advice from people who have gone ahead and done it and, found the easier way. That's brilliant. But what we are saying is that mindset that keeps on saying, okay, if I correct this, then I will be happy, or if I can have this, or when I am there. And it's constantly orientating a sense of feeling connected and belonging, and permission to be satisfied, fascinated, or love ourselves. It's putting it in a future, that is inaccessible, but leaving us in a kind of limbo until that happens. So being mindful, I would even go as far as to say that there's so much cultural programming. At the time, I'm going to say around from my late teenage years, definitely into the 20s and 30s, so much of, I'm looking there at the word judgment, because what I'm about to say is actually very judgy. The way the advertising industry played on this, the satisfaction that we were feeling within ourselves, and the confusion with the speed of, life opening up so much and so much more information pouring in. There was so much messaging around what perfect is, what healthy is, what the best you is, and that you can have it once you just suspend yourself. And perhaps in that we lost out on the information that is also equally available, but today we're going to just chew on it a little bit, because it might have gotten lost in the messaging, or in the period of life where self-improvement felt like not only necessary, but especially, if you take when you're just starting out your family, and or you've just gotten married, and you just started out your career, and you have lots of goals, and you go in somewhere, and so you are constantly looking for where you can improve, because you're embarking on the next level in your life. So you look to other people who have done it, and you see where you're at, and you look at the steps they took to get there. And so the process is there, and the process is helpful, but the mindset of postponing yourself until you achieve it is really where the stop improving yourself would actually be very healthy advice, and responsible, So I think the messaging that got lost, or maybe hasn't been focused on as much, is how we are actually wired. So this is in our biology. This isn't even in a do we like the idea or not perspective. It's actually just the way we made, that we are very much wired for improvement. I'm sorry about the buzzing in the background. And if we come into our system, maybe just from our brain perspective, we know that we wired for improvement from the way that our reptilian brain, or our bottom brain, the brain that is active when we are born, measures and records, kind of like a record keeper, circumstances and experiences that have allowed our process in our development to grow, but significantly our brain remembers the experiences that made that stop, that hijacked us, that got us frightened. And so the brain is taking note of all the information that it's been sent from our very instinctive and intuitive system, which we actually read in. It's amazing when you consider it. We read in at least 50 meters radius from our body, and it is larger than that. But that's the only, that's what they've been able to measure so far. So if you think about 50 meters to either side of you, right? In front and behind you. And you contemplate all the information that's just in that space. Like the weather that's going on, the birds that are flying there, the neighbors next door, what's going on in their house. And, you know, that's a huge amount of information that our system is taking in, and it's sorting to what's relevant, what isn't relevant. And that's all happening before it actually even like lodges in our brain, let alone on a level where we think about it and notice it. So it's not only our external environment that our system is taking all this information or wired to compute, but our internal systems are perfectly and precisely designed to constantly seek let's try that again. I suddenly can't get the word. It's equilibrium. All right, and even in the imperfect bodies. Okay, so say now someone's born with a kidney disease and isn't having the function where the body is able to independently balance the dilutions of the salts and sugars and all those good things in our body. The rest of our body is working with balancing and compensating for that. So in its beautiful design of making sure that there's enough of all the levels of whether it's chemicals or sugars or salts or heat, all those beautiful balances going on in our body, even beyond, I suppose what I'm trying to say here is all of this is going on without us even thinking about it. Our heart is regulating, our breath is regulating, and our inner thermometer is regulating. And even when there are some systems that may have been designed and or have like damaged parts, there's still a level of balance and compensation and plasticity going on there within our system. Another element that where we wired, which doesn't actually seem that fair sometimes, is in the way that we think. So it obviously comes up later on in life once our deductive and reductive thinking, which comes in early teenagers, has kicked in, but we become very aware that we are actually wired towards a negative bias, which means we have a tendency to walk into a situation or to experience a situation from the perspective of noticing what's missing or noticing what is lacking. And it's really good to know this, because it does seem a little bit unfair that, like, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to walk into a situation and I'm just wired to look for what's wrong. And of course, keeping this in balance is, or bearing in mind that this ability is there only for us to take notes, only to give us information. It's not necessarily there to be translated into what it means about our identity or what it means about the value of the situation that we're experiencing. So the way that we are wired for improvement is somewhat subtle on the inside, absolutely fascinating to explore, but it is a lot less subtle in our language, because we communicate in our desire for improvement all the time. And in our last episode, we did have a look at some of Dr. David Hawkins' the word will come to me now. I'm going to call it a ladder for now, but there is a proper word for it. But basically what it is, a scale, there we go, is the scale of consciousness, and it is measured, the measurement of the speed of certain emotions are basically plotted along this scale. And we recognize that when our consciousness or the lens that we are perceiving something is lower than 200, so in the space of shame, guilt, apathy, fear, anger, pride, irritation, aggravation, all of that, it's under 200. But the moment we get to courage or boredom, and we surpass the 200 mark, then the actual movement inside of us and the speed at which all of this beautiful calibrating and equalizing and balancing is happening, starts happening at a faster speed. And then we move into, curiosity, neutrality, and willingness and acceptance. And so then we start moving at a much faster speed, which is experienced as love, as joy, as enlightenment, as happiness, but on the inside, not just ideas and thoughts. It's that feeling that we're hoping to get from improvement of feeling a sense of belonging, and feeling a sense of self and purpose and connection on the inside. So how are we languaging, or how do we know that we are communicating? Well, I suppose it depends how negative bias has been allowed to come out or be expressed, and your cultural programming and your childhood, your familial experience will be able to give you, perhaps not necessarily inform you on how you feel now, but if you feel surprised or you notice that on some aspects when you communicating the desire for improvement, that they come out in a consciousness that feels a little bit low, because that's how it is for now, if I can leave it at that, and we'll go deeper into it. So improvements, that is, or our negative bias that is being communicated in slower vibrations, is the feeling of shame. I suppose when we, let's see, if we think about people who complain deeply, or topics that make us feel dissatisfaction, that we need to point out the dissatisfaction in the situation, that we need to complain about what we see in there. We're still communicating a desire for improvement, all right? But we're doing it in a slow, low vibration, and it's coming from a perspective of, I suppose, the background feeling of it's a real pity that that's not there. And so a strong negative bias. A little bit faster than that, we might be communicating our desire for improvement with a little bit of guilt, where we say things like, I know there's other people who have it worse off, or that was really a beautiful party, but where we're not feeling 100% comfortable that we see a need for improvement, or even desire a need for improvement, and so we express it with a little bit of unsureness. Whereas if it's, and we can express it through anger, that this really doesn't work for me, that this is missing and it's unfair, still communicating a desire for improvement. So once it moves past 200, it starts being in a space where communicating improvement, or the desire for more, starts becoming healthy and constructive and creative. And that's when, there's enough self-esteem to say, so from self-esteem, what I mean, there's permission within to say, that was such an amazing holiday. How about next year we take it up a level and we stay at a hotel, or we go on the speedboats, or how about next year we blow it out the park and we do an overseas trip. And there's no question of, do I have permission? Is it okay for me to want that level of improvement? Or am I still a little bit entangled down here in what I was taught about what I'm allowed to want or need from a perspective of improvement? Okay, so improvement is one lens that we can look through ourselves at in a growing process. And I think, or I hope that what we've drawn from this is that there are definitely very light or helpful ways of using improvement, and if not helpful, completely natural, in that this is the way we made, babies. And this, whether we agree or not, this is how this vehicle or being or person has come into this world and is wired to be in this world, just not getting trapped in the identity or leaving our identity in the end of it, the improvement, because also that's not going to come, because we're also wired for once we achieve something that we will move on to the next, and we'll keep on expanding, and that's wonderful, absolutely wonderful, as long as we don't get lost there or fail to recognize that the journey in between the self, the number one, and the completion of the initiation and coming to the place of, opening a possibility for growth to enter a new beginning. We also have the possibility or the opportunity that can run concurrent with seeing ourselves through the lens of improvement, through seeing ourselves through the lens of fascination, right? And I'd like to draw an opposite here, just for a second, not for us to hold on to, in that when we're looking at ourselves through a lens of improvement, especially from like the deficit, as opposed to when we're looking at ourselves through the lens of fascination, especially from its higher side or higher perspective, what we have is what appears to be kind of two very opposite ways of holding ourselves, viewing ourselves, or exploring ourselves. Okay, but the reason why I drew this sort of dichotomy is more to emphasize or to focus on the fact that we've actually been taught a lot about improvement and using the tool of improvement to progress. But absent certainly from my upbringing or messaging or predominance, that sort of thought space when it came to education, is it actually fascinates me that we aren't taught how to be fascinated with ourselves. And so I want to spend some time on this with you, because I honestly believe that it is the elixir. It's the very nourishment or nectar that carries us through our initiations or our hero's journeys, or the journey from the fool to the world, if we take a tarot perspective. It really, it's just so surprising to me that we got the learning here, and the unlearning, I think, has also been spoken about and emphasized. but the fascination with ourselves tend to sort of get stuck. I'm going to go back to remind us that we're in a place where we don't need to defend, explain, and justify to hold some ideas, because fascination and seeing yourself through you in its shadow is narcissism. And that is when the obsession with only elements of self, and normally elements that are changeable, or physical, and not narcissism. We all are narcissistic. Like if you work with children from the place where we're not classifying children, but narcissism is actually just a part of our development where it is all about me, and that's very appropriate. And look at me, and I smile for you, and and you smile back at me, and that's a very important part of our bonding. But when it becomes our identity, in our personality, in our mental capacity, when what is flowing throughout, out of us, when our narcissistic relationship flows out of us, it creates an unhealthy relationship to everything in our life, substances, people, the world, the divine, and of course with ourselves, And in a way, we've kind of gotten stuck there and not gone further with the conversation. To great or less extent, because there's lots of beautiful people having lots of beautiful conversations out there. But maybe we met a resistance to the ideas like falling in love with ourselves, or being fascinated by what we do well, or being so tickled and curious about things that aren't productive or meaningful or considered very adult, or relevant, so we can see that fascination with self, as it develops and as it improves, can actually, or does, feed us and give us a perspective of self that is, I think, one of the best ways of equipping ourselves when we are going through huge transition, when we are wanting and needing to feel really secure within, because what is old that is leaving and what that new is coming in is, I don't know, maybe just a high level of unfamiliar to us, and it's feeling insecure, and it's feeling, difficult to decipher between what's anxiety and what's intuition. So the more we can create safety, not through fixing something and trying to determine what is coming into our life or leaving our life, or trying to control our thoughts about it, or trying to ritual or yoga or organic food that's out of our life. This fascination with ourselves can really just hold us in such a beautiful way to see life through you only that isn't narcissistic. Because seeing life through you will be the only truth that is actually happening at that moment in you, with you as the center of you. And seeing life through you ignites you so way beyond the things that we thought we needed improvement, or while we're actually working really hard on the improvement. When it is combined with the fascination with self, it ignites you in that what it does is it colors in and it enriches, and the in-between, the realizing what is missing, the negative bias, and what is needed for improvement and growth and expansion, and the actual realization of it. So there's no suspension of self. It's quite the opposite. There's lots of add-in of self, which then flows through you and adds to all the other elements around you. So seeing life through you. Okay, I think let's start with the, it's good to know that you're a thinker, all right? So, of course, we all know that we are thinking. Where it gets tough is when we don't like what we're thinking, or when what we're thinking is intrusive, or if we're not comfortable with what we're thinking. And so, how does one know, or why would I say it's good to know you're a thinker? I think a nice space or a nice gap to create here is to realize that you are thinking, or you have a thinker, but that you aren't the thinker. Because what the space that creates for you there is that you'll realize that while you are a thinker, there are many different thinkers within there, and that your mind is actually your servant and it's not your master. So when your mind feels like your master, it feels like you get trapped in your mental body and you get taken over by anxiety, depression, going over a rumination, going over the same conversation over and over again. But also that there is an automatic background conversation going on, which is based 100% in the past. And the reason why it's automatic is because that's how our beautiful, efficient brain works, in that 95% of what you're thinking on a certain level, it's not all your thoughts, but on a certain level every day is exactly what you thought the day before. So it's not really a place of new information, it's just a place of constantly giving you the updates. The updates. And so this is happening in our conscious mind, and those are our conscious thoughts. But it's good to know that that's happening, but also that that's not the only thing happening. And the way, or a way, that we are able to do this is by when we notice that we are in a thought. And I think it's, pick whichever one you want, but the next time you in a thought place where you actually get in a little bit irritated that you won't stop thinking about it, or you want to stop thinking about it, or you can feel that your body is getting overstressed, or your head's starting to hurt and stuff like that. Don't try and stop your thoughts or change your thoughts by any stretch of the imagination, because that's like showing up with a knife at a gunfight. Let those thoughts be. Let that carry on, but take a breath. And even if it's just for that second, notice the breath. All right? It might just be a second of peace, but your awareness moves back from the thinker, which we love, and we are not going to, that we're not going to try and take out in any way. But we take a breath, and all we're doing is we are relaxing our body. So our mind keeps on going, but for an instant we are aware that our body can actually relax while our mind is going. So how beautiful is this? That's just like accumulated. So once that starts gaining momentum around a thought. So I want to say here also, suspend judgment on how long that moment of peace feels like you, or how deep that moment of peace feels like you. Because let's say that you've got a trigger going, all right, and that whenever you get a letter, you think it's a bill, and you don't have enough money, and so actually just seeing a letter in the mail can trigger your physical body. And this is part of the 95% that gets repeated every single day, all right? And that's just our wiring. But when you kind of interrupt that wiring, not by trying to think positively, not by telling yourself to stop, but just by giving it a slightly different physical response. So the crazy still comes up, wada, 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 but the only thing that's different is you take a breath, and for like 3 seconds, you just notice your physical body relax. So the same thoughts are going, but it's getting a less response. And literally, that is the manual way of sort of getting, I want to say, controlling your mind, but that's not what you're doing at all. Is you introducing a different physical response to the same thoughts. So what happens is, over time, the thoughts come up with less regularity because they're not getting the same physical feedback from your body. What also happens, if this is your cup of tea, is that 3 seconds of peace feels really nice. And there is definitely so much wiring in your body that is also gravitates towards pleasure, that gravitates towards the path of least resistance, that gravitates towards joy, that gravitates towards peace, so the more that response comes up and you actually enjoy, 3 seconds of peace in between that hectic little tirade of torment going on inside of me, starts becoming more desirable. And the movement in the beginning, it might feel quite manual in that you got to actually remind yourself to just breathe, and you let those thoughts keep on going, and you experience your body feeling peaceful, and then that space of peace becomes like more and more, and you can actually linger. You decide, I'll have another breath while I'm here because I quite like this feeling of peace. And you have another. You're not abdicating your responsibility. You're not denying what's going on. What you're doing is you're actually just expanding your awareness to more than one element of you, more than one of your existing bodies or systems or layers or dimensions or whatever you want to call it. So we are allowing the body and the thinker to be present. And they're having opposite conversations, but they're not in, conflict with each other. So another reason why fascination, and this might be one of my favorites, why I would say that this is the elixir for going through any change, is because when you start paying attention, getting fascinated by yourself, okay? So we're not scrutinizing self. Sometimes it does come up that way. Don't worry, it's all good. Even if we just start paying attention to our inner narrative, okay? Once again, not to change it, but we just start actually noticing what some of that 95% that is on auto mode is all about, okay? Or what it's saying. And the more we can do this in balance, where we're not only noticing that which is like negative about our inner narrative, but when you feeling peacey, you also stumble across some positive things that you can notice about yourself or about the world around you. And you might even have a time where you're suspending thinking about good or bad, and you're just having a think about yourself. We move in between these states of consciousness all through the day, all day, So nothing that we're conjuring up here. We're just practicing taking a breath and feeling the peace, so that what we are thinking, comes onto our radar. And you'll notice that in your contemplation or in your prayer or just in your dilly-dally thoughts about what you wonder, your curiosity, even, what you'd like to improve, places you'd like to go. It doesn't really matter what it is that you're thinking about. When you become aware of what's going on the inside, you start noticing that these other elements on the outside, my children, the outside world with its social media, music, news headlines, my relationships, my connection with, a higher purpose or your divine, whatever that is. When you start paying attention and from a space of fascination and appreciation, just noticing these thoughts, you start noticing that the outside world or the people around you are... So I've noticed it more with kids, but not exclusively with kids. Like, they're saying something which you were thinking, you haven't verbalized it yet, but yet they seem to be responding to it. Or you ask a question within yourself and you hear the answer randomly through something you're listening to or something you've looked up, or something comes up on your feed that seems to be an answer. And so we start noticing that even sometimes in like the meaning that we get from seeing two dragonflies together, we start noticing that we are actually in conversation with our world and ourself, and the idea that our heart and our nervous system and our gut are reading information and picking up things from the past and the future, or intuitively, instinctively giving us the heads up, bringing us information that we haven't necessarily earned or searched for, deepens the sense of connection, which is such an enrichment to the self, and it definitely starts igniting you, and it brings a different dimension even to the people around you. Because if I'm in a very fixed space, and I'm stuck here on this fixed, or this idea that until I improve the way I speak to my child, I can't expect such and such from him, or a certain feeling within myself. So I'm working on my improvement here, okay? But when I'm working from it through the lens of fascination, the connections that start coming through, or the dimension that I start seeing myself through, really can shift. Because when I notice that I have a thinker, and on one level the thinker's saying, if you keep on talking in a strict tone, your child's going to keep on responding defensively. So I'm working on my tone here, okay? And then I notice that, say now my tone's on my radar. I notice how I use my tone, when I use my tone. I might even notice that my child's saying to me, Mommy, why do you have to pull your face like that? Or they're giving feedback on, which tone works for them. Or something will come up in my feed that resonates with how we respond to different tones and how we ignite different triggers through our, the calibration of our voice, the intonation of our voice. So when I say that it adds a dimension, it can be as dynamic as you literally start seeing your child in a very different space. Because not that he's coming to you and saying, Mom, I don't like it when you use that tone. I would be so much more obliging if you had to say that in a nice way to me. Not quite in that way. But when you start noticing that your child is quite connected to you or that, a song starts playing that kind of brings the message on how you do what you do, then you do start seeing your child in a different light. And that's what I mean by can add dimension. And in your openness to be able to receive this cool kind of information, you may start seeing yourself in a different dimension, or different elements of you which can unlock and change more than what you thought you were trying to improve, which is another reason why I think being fascinated and being open with yourself is such a bonus. If not the actual sort of foundation or container to do change or to bring improvement into our life. And I think something that sort of evolves from it as we start seeing like more dimensions, we also start noticing that a lot of what we thought we were going out to create, or that we had to go out and seek and make, we realize that we're actually discovering or rediscovering it within ourselves, or within our access, and we start experiencing a deeper sense of belonging and connection, and feeling that the universe, or use whichever word works for you, life itself, day to day, is actually for me, and not against me. And that's a dimension that starts shifting so much of how we feel and perceive ourselves, and really, really ignites what is subtle and nuanced and so unique about you. And the flip over of making improvements is more about discovering what is already there, or what potentials are there. And part of it is remembering, sometimes but coincidentally or through discovery or tripping upon it about ourselves, because more and more dimensions and connections are opening in us. And it's more like remembering or releasing or allowing the parts of us that we may not have earned or searched for, that just haven't been given attention to or emphasized in our development or in our growing up, and they are revealed and start igniting and come out of dormancy. And it is so you, and it is so sort of enfolded here in how you are experiencing your thinker, allowing yourself be fascinated in the space before it's decided whether it's good or bad, or allowed or not allowed to be thinking in that way. And so when you're seeing life through you, and allowing improvement to kind of do its thing, but only on the level where it's supposed to be doing its thing, you're opening up, right, to a self that is not necessarily being measured and marked for what is missing and what needs improvement, but a fascinating discovery of a someone who you've known for sure up until now, but you're also realizing that there's a whole lot more going on there that I don't necessarily have to make a list of and go with my searchlight, but just start being fascinated by me, for me. And I hope that has resonated somewhere with you today, or opened something for you today, ignited something in you today. If anything, at least felt that you are accompanied where you are at today. And so I am actually going to take our next theme from this card. It's not a blind draw. I put it there. I knew it was going to be New Beginnings. And that is our theme for our next episode, is we're going to be discussing, how we move into new beginnings, and through a fascination with ourselves, and allowing our wiring to do its job, and allowing our heart, our other parts of us to be ignited, to deepen our experience of self on our process through whichever initiational journey that we are on. And it may be one, it may be 2 episodes, but with that, how do we do a beautiful, compassionate and forgiving review of our past when our new is a real new. So with that, mamas, I'm going to say goodbye. But before I ring off for today, please feel free to let me know in the comment section if this resonated with you, how it resonated with you, any thoughts that you'd like to share. So feel free to like and subscribe so that you'll know. I post every Tuesday and Thursday, but you're welcome to come anytime you like. And from next week, I'll be opening up to some personal, intuitive one-on-one sessions will be available, but I'll let you know all about that in the description box. So until the next time, lots and lots of love to you, and I'll see you soon.